Article 7 would be okay with the union's latest proposal if we can reach agreement on the MOU. So I did not have to type this up, but we have a counter on the MOU. I'm going to kind of read it, go through it piece by piece so that you guys can kind of respond whether if you're okay with the gist of it, we can type it up and get to the document here. So one thing we want to do is, instead of having more of a formal committee approach, call it a work group. And let me go through it from start to finish, and you guys can comment and ask questions so you can kind of see the big picture. So looking at paragraph number 1, we are going to propose that we have a committee of 7 with adding the HR director, and the HR director being the chair. We're thinking of it as a less formalized group, so not with the formal voting and all of these kinds of things. We would read something like, the work group shall consist of the HR director, 3 representatives appointed by the union, and 3 representatives appointed by the employer. HR directors serve as the chair, really just to keep everything moving. In paragraph 2, we would expand on that a little bit. Right now you have it reading that the group's going to be charged with conducting research on the cost and feasibility. We would add to that the work group shall be charged with gathering data and with conducting research on the cost and feasibility of implementing a salary schedule. So basically just adding that gathering data, gathering information, we think is going to be a big part of this process. In paragraph 3, the work group, candidly, we're not as comfortable with the terminology make recommendation. Again, it sounds more like a formal, let's put everything in, let's make a recommendation and put it in our hands. We think the decision making really should still be at negotiations, but what we're envisioning is this group come together and the language and present kind of data, options, cost, the whole, everything essentially. Let me read the language that I just came up with. The work group shall present any information, data, or options to the parties' bargaining teams by May 1, 2020. The parties agree that compensation, including salary schedules and any other options provided by the work group, shall not be binding on the parties, but will be subject to negotiations. So the idea here being, the big thing is the group gets together, gathers the data, looks at all the options, including the step plan, the status quo, anything in between, gathers the information, gathers costs, gathers whatever else either side thinks is relevant, and then sort of presents the whole thing to us here at this table, and we all decide what we're going to do from there. And not really voting on what's the recommendation, things of that nature. We think that would impinge upon what we're doing here. Then the last paragraph, we're suggesting changing the minimum meet time from 6 to 4, thinking 2 a semester. Nothing prevents anybody from meeting more often or exchanging emails and data and things of that nature. We just, in recognition of the calendar or whatnot, think maybe a meeting early on in the semester, another meeting late in the semester, and then doing the same thing again in the first semester of 2020 would be feasible. Lastly, where we would add a paragraph 5 that would read, the parties agree that the college can implement the benefits or the compensation and benefits article for this academic year, the Article 10 and 11. I assume we're TA is part of this, but we want language in this. We can implement that for this year. And that, if you want, we can put language at future years or whatever, subject still to negotiations, if you think that's necessary. But that's the proposal in a nutshell. I think the big key for us is we think it could be beneficial to have, as opposed to, it's kind of cumbersome to do it here, a body that gathers the evidence, looks at all the various options, costs, whole 9 yards. The reality is, if we end up at impasse over this, which we hope we don't, I think both sides have indicated it's a pretty big item to them, but we'll have to go through all that independently anyway, present all that stuff. So if we've done that as a team, we can at least flesh out the information, flesh out the various options. I don't know that we'll agree on it, and that's part of why we don't want a recommendation language in there, because if we're not going to agree on it, the decision making really should be here as opposed to delegating that to the work group. So that's sort of the idea we have. If you're got questions on it, happy to answer it. Thoughts?
Yeah, I'd like to know why you can't have a co-chair representative of the union.
Well,
the reason I ask that is, and nothing against you personally, if you just have a chair that's representing management, they can steer that committee in a direction. Or if you have co-chairs where a union representative is working with him, then they mutually can get to agree on what direction to take this. And I don't mean to sound paranoid.
No, I hear you.
I've been party to committees like that before when I worked for the Department of Corrections, and the management would just steer it in their direction. So that's my question.
Yeah, I don't know that we're opposed to that, frankly. We didn't talk about co-chair. And just so I'm clear, I don't even know that if I were proposing, I'd propose a chair at all. We're sort of taking that, because I think that's a legitimate concern, because we'd have the same concern with union being the chair, that, it's just going to be, the way we're envisioning it is really there's no need for a chair. It's everybody getting together and kind of presenting everything. And if you guys want to present an option, by all means do it. The chair doesn't have to agree to it, in other words, and vice versa. Even if it's not something we are agreeable to or we even like, let's put it all out there. The chair is probably an okay idea just because somebody's got to be driving this. Otherwise, everybody gets together and no one has. So I don't know that we'd be terribly opposed to having a co-chair kind of consensus. We didn't talk about that, but you guys can chime in. To me, it's less about setting the agenda, more about just keeping things moving.
I understand. I just don't want somebody saying, well, they didn't look at all this stuff because, management didn't want to look at that. Mm-hmm. And so this way, they can say, well, there was a co-chair there and they were agreeing what to talk about.
I think we'd probably be okay with it.
I don't have an issue with management driving me in one direction or the other. I haven't experienced that as of yet. I don't think I would. I do get feedback from everyone, and I'm willing to take that across the board.
And I don't mean to say anything.
No, and I didn't take it that way. So, but yes.
Do we care if there's a co-chair? I don't think we do. I think that's probably a good suggestion, because what I want to make sure is that we all, even as this work group, would have the freedom to present whatever on either side. That's a little different than saying we're all going to agree on everything, but at least we should have it all on the table. Or if you're starting to kick around data, cost, all that, I'd rather we are all on the same page. And even if we don't agree, because these things often break down where we're just disagreeing because we're using different data sets. Mm-hmm. That to me is not very productive. So I think we'd probably be okay with tweaking that.
And with the information gathering and sharing rather than a recommendation decision, that issue will be obviated, because all you're doing is bringing information to this team here, rather than having to struggle with what the recommendation will be. So that makes sense.
Right, and I think that will go a long way toward developing the information. So if we do end up worst case scenario impasse, then let's be frank, we're going to end up before a special magistrate or maybe before the board, and they're going to want to see what the options are. Right? They're going to tell us, first thing they're going to tell us is, all right, if we implemented the union's step plan, what's kind of the cost, whether we can come up with a negligible cost, or they're going to look at our plans, what's cost, what the information, what are the other institutions doing. All of those things are the kinds of things they're going to want to see. So let's flesh it out through this process. And then if we can work from there to an agreement, great. We're talking a lot in here, obviously, about philosophical differences and things of that nature. And maybe when we put numbers and data to it, we're not that far apart. I don't know. I'll be candid. I'm still pessimistic personally, but that doesn't really matter here. So we could use this as that vehicle to gather that information, because using it here is going to be, not very productive, certainly not as efficient. Having said that, whoever's on these committees is biting off a little bit of extra work, but presumably both sides are okay with that. So that's where we kind of stand. If you want, we can take a few minutes and type that up, or if you want to talk about that amongst yourselves, you can break for a few minutes and But if you think that's something that's agreeable to, then I think we're as close as we've been in a while with some of these things.
Okay, yeah, I think it might be, I think it would be definitely worthwhile to just start working that up. We'll talk for a few minutes. My gut tells me the co-chair idea or no chair at all, and just someone just sort of picks it up. You know, the responsibility of facilitating as it goes would be, either of those would be fine. We did manage to get something on Article 12, but again, not necessarily requiring that it be tied into the rest of this, since there is, I think, a little bit more here to work through. But you have this electronically. I just printed out 2 copies because it was, long. As you can see on page 2, we put in some language along the lines of what we discussed earlier today. 5 years full-time teaching at a state or community college may be used to substitute for the seminar and college teaching and learning requirement. And then kind of mostly clarifying that if there are equivalent graduate or undergraduate level courses approved, they can be used to substitute for either one. And then just adding that approval won't be unreasonably denied. Then on page 3 and mostly on page 4, we put the timeline with some small changes and then one bigger change from our original proposal. I think it's pretty similar and self-explanatory. The big change is in number 9. We've said that really the only hard deadlines here are the first deadline, the candidate needing to submit an application to peer review committee. That's a deadline of October 1, and then the April 20th deadline of making the recommendation for the final recommendation for continuing contract. Those are the only 2 deadlines that we think need to be firm. The rest we've said can be extended upon request by either the continuing contract applicant or the academic dean. It's really just those 2 going back and forth in those intermediate steps, whenever necessary due to extenuating circumstances.
Graham, the timeline, just a question on the timeline. What is the impetus for the very specific steps in the timeline? Has there been any situation where a faculty member was denied because of failure on the part of the administration to act in a timely manner? I'm trying to just understand the necessity for that, since we have a process that's working.
Right. Yeah. Not here that I've heard about right now.
Because that's never happened.
Frankly, it's very stressful for faculty because there's a lot of unknowns. A lot of faculty feel like they don't know what's going on. They don't know when they're going to hear. I've heard from a lot of faculty that the process is unfair and they feel stressed out because they don't know what's going on and what's going to happen in their job. So having deadlines with clear steps, everyone's on the same page, everyone knows what's going on. If you're deficient in part of your portfolio, you'll know in time to fix it, those kinds of things. Most of this was taken from HCC's contract.
Mm-hmm.
So, but for feedback, there are a lot of faculty find the process confusing as well.
A lot of faculty.
Yes.
Well, our concern is that we have an IMM that is so explicitly clear. In fact, faculty who have gone through it expressed that it was clear and they appreciated it. We did a Faculty Development Institute training with Human Resources and Dean Thorne on the process. The deans are charged with making sure they follow through, and we're making certain that that occurs as well. We've had some change in the administration, but I'm not certain trying to understand how that timeline makes it more clear than what it already is.
It doesn't feel clear to faculty. I've talked to a lot of faculty that was a
Faculty who've read the IMM and
faculty who've recently gone through the process.
And communicated with their dean and participated in the process with their dean. It wasn't clear.
The things that faculty found helpful were the workshops, but the IMM was not clear to most faculty. A lot of faculty felt very confused because there was the kind of criteria and then there was the part about the portfolio, and it was not clear to faculty. After the workshop, they often felt better, but I've talked to a lot of faculty who felt bewildered, frustrated, uncertain. That's the feedback I got from faculty. I did this a long time ago, so I haven't done this. So it's a new one.
Like a timetable on that feedback, like about what time frame. I'm not trying to identify
Yeah,
faculty, but just
right.
more or less like
Well, some of it was, I don't think they were clearly given timeframes, and I'm not trying to get anybody in trouble, but they were trying to get answers, and the person wasn't emailing back or getting back in contact with them. They weren't sure what was supposed to be all in the portfolio, and so I think part of it was they weren't getting some of the questions answered the way the process is supposed to work. And so that was part of the confusion.
There's
And then
a
they
lot of
went to the IMMs to try to figure it out on their own, and then they were confused by that. But I agree that both of them went to the little training and they understood it better then. But it was a couple issues. It was the IMM, but it was also communication with their supervisor, and not the lack of communication between the supervisor and them.
I mean, it's just in any place, it's going to be a stressful process, right? You're like, your job is on the line. So the clearer the process is, I think that reduces a lot of the stress for faculty. If they know exactly what's going to happen, when it's going to happen, if there's a problem, this is when I'll know. If there's a problem, I can do something about it. That will alleviate a lot of that uncertainty and therefore stress. So anyone going through a continuing contract process will feel. Just having everything spelled out makes people feel better.
Yeah, I would think that if one's job is relying on going through this process and then there's a sense of bewilderment or befuddlement or frustration or agitation about it, that one would make an appointment with the dean who's responsible for this, an actual appointment, and take that IMN and sit down and say, this is what I'm struggling with, can you help me? Because I think that would be so clear. I mean, that would be the rational thing to do, and that they really don't have to be out there alone struggling with this. That there is a process for it.
I don't know if those things were attempted or not.
Right, but one would think these are faculty members who are
Yeah,
supervised by the dean. You would think that this is my job is riding on this, and I don't have any answers. I need to meet with you, and I'm going to bring this IMM, and we're going to go through this together. And I need these answers, and or to Dean Thorne, or connect with me, or none of that has occurred. In fact, there are some other things that came to light about the timeline that, of course, I'm not going to articulate because they were disconcerting, and it had nothing to do with not understanding the process. So,
Well, I also don't see the harm in making that.
well, clarity is important, but I'm just saying I don't understand how those stipulated timelines would make it more clear. I don't understand how it provides greater clarity by having that timeline in there.
Then you're not sitting there wondering for months what's going on. You know exactly where in the process you are. So part of it is, I think, the time frame. Just, I handed in my portfolio. What's going on? I don't know.
So I have 3 hard deadlines in there, and the
2.
rest were 2. How do we feel about those 2?
We would have to discuss that. Which two are you articulating?
We only have 2 hard deadlines. The other ones are.
Yeah, the first one is October 1, candidate has to submit an application. The second one is April 20, there's sort of finality to the process, which I think the April 20th
It's already in
is
the
is correct. deadline.
Okay, so it's already in the IMM, correct?
It's already
April 20th is in the IMM, which
Right. So how is that clarifying our existing process by
I think the major difference that I can see is that there's very specific deadlines, which I understand are being open to, some are not necessary, but I see this as a way that the faculty members are going to say, okay, I got to do this by this, this, and this, and this. However, I know how hard it is to get faculty in to see me sometimes regarding these. I've asked, sometimes they'll say, we need to sit down, we need to discuss, and then I get this mad rush when people want to come in. Deadlines, you have to be accountable. There has to be some accountability for faculty to be on top of those things as well. The deadline deadlines for me as a dean really put pressure on me to now make sure that I've met with maybe 5 people that are working on tenure process. I, on any given day, may have 30 things that I'm doing. So for me to say, okay, by October 1st, I need to sit down with 5 people who are coming and meeting, because I asked them to come meet with me annually. And I think adding to the evaluation process where they are in the process will also be another very helpful step. So I see this as a way to keep faculty on task, whereas that's part of the development process. Those faculty learning objectives, what's your developmental plan? That's for them to decide. And that puts that ownership back to the faculty. So if they are developing this plan for the next 5 years, this is my goal, this is what I want to do. So those deadlines also put a limit or a timeline for them. I mean, they need to outline their own plan is what I think. I mean, that's how the policy is set up. It gives the ownership to the faculty. It doesn't have me driving and saying, okay, I need this, I need this, I need this, I need this. I want to see professional development from the faculty's perspective and from their own ability, not from me saying, I need this, I need this, I need this. I'm there to guide and support, but I'm not there to drive that portfolio. So that's my take on these deadlines.
Well, I mean, you have a proposal, I think we understand some of the concern with it, so, welcome the counter, that's what we need. I guess I'm curious now if you talked long enough that Ryan's had a chance to.
Almost.
No
Well, let's-
filibuster.
Let's let you guys talk. I'll email this to you in about 5 minutes time. And we'll print it out.
Are we doing culture?
Yeah, I'm just gonna put in the co-chair idea. So it sounds like we're okay with that.
That's reasonable.
Just give me
Okay,
a second.
we'll talk about the rest.
All right, let's leave and let you guys talk, and I'll email you this in a second and bring in a paper copy.
We need copies of 7, 10, 11, and 14, 3.
Okay. Yeah, I'll try and get all that now. 2 minutes.
You want us to let you know when we're ready? I don't think it'll be a long conversation. Okay.